Yeah, how you all doing? Look, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. We've 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 had a lot of engagement with the Irish EV Owners Association and Irish EV owners in general through surveys and lots of meetings with Simon and his predecessor over the years. So it's nice to be well, we've lots of meetings with the committee. It's nice to have an opportunity to speak to broader association as well and other EV owners. My name is Conor O'Brien. I'm the Public Policy and Regulation Manager for eCars. And I'm just going to give a kind of a quick run through, I suppose, of ESB's involvement in electromobility, the network that's there, where it originated from, I suppose the services that are there to support that network or to provide that network, and then look a bit about, I suppose, what we're trying to do to the journey we're on to kind of bring the network to the next level. So if you can move that on, Simon, that'd be great. So yeah, I'll go into detail around the network that we developed in Ireland in a couple of minutes in more detail. But we started that around 2010, 2009. I think the first chargers were installed around 2010. We've since gone on and we've just over 100 rapids installed in London for Transport for London. That's servicing the taxi industry and the public there. We've also about 39 rapid chargers or fast chargers installed in Coventry, and we're undertaking, I think it's about 400 charge points in Birmingham City as well. And we're just kicking off that project at the moment. And then there's a few other things, I suppose. Within Ireland, we've installed chargers privately for a number of companies, but one of the largest ones would be Jaguar Land Rover site down in Shannon. And then we've also recently implemented through Smart Energy Services, which is another ESB division. They've introduced a new electric bus at the hotel out at the airport for the Crown Plaza. If you can move on, Simon. So just to talk about the network, there's roughly around 1,100 charge points across the island. That includes Northern Ireland as well. So I'm going to talk about some of these updates. This is, I suppose, probably around a current figure of chargers that are there. There's about 100 fast or DC chargers, so between 44 and 50 kilowatt chargers. There's 4 high power chargers, 150 kilowatt units in place at the moment, and we hope to increase that significantly over the next while. And again, I'll go into that in more detail in a bit. The network that's there, I suppose, it's spread right across the country, and I know I'm talking to a lot of you now who know this all better than I do. And the original network, I suppose, was installed as a pilot project with the regulator, with the Irish government, and it was done under a managed service agreement at the time, where we entered into managed service agreement, a memorandum of understanding with some of the car companies that they would bring cars to the market. We would put charging infrastructure in place, and the government would put certain incentives in place. And that was around 2010. So at that stage, I suppose there was very few people even providing charge points. There was very few options around electric cars. I think the first Leaf came around 2011, 2010. I know we got a number of Mitsubishi i-MiEV at the time. I brought in especially, and they were 2010 registrations. And that's where the network developed. The whole idea of trying to solve the chicken and egg scenario. So you put chargers right across the country, whether it's commercially viable to do so or not. It was about geographic spread, and that's what that pilot, I suppose, achieved to a certain degree. You'll see every county has a number of chargers. You know, most large towns would have charge points, and then putting fast charge points then on the motorway or national road networks. And I suppose that's I suppose where we're at today, and we're trying to move beyond that, and I'll go into that in more detail in a minute. If you want to move on, Simon. So just I mentioned, just for any of you who aren't aware, aren't seasoned EV drivers, just I suppose the top part in white kind of just outlines, I suppose, the key pieces from a customer perspective as to what they need the network. So it's supposed to be able to find the nearest charge point easily, to be able to easily start the transaction and stop it and connect and charge, and then payment and billing that supports that. So I suppose beyond the physical network that I've just talked about in the previous slide, there's all of those services in the bottom half of the slide that I suppose supports that physical network. So that's the chargers themselves are smarter. They have communications within them that communicates back to our charge point management system. We then have 24/7 customer call center, which is provided by Abtran in Cork on our behalf. They have a certain amount of remote functionality of the network if there's issues to reset chargers and do various things. Then we have our maintenance contractors who do preemptive maintenance, where they visit each charge point a number of times a year, and reactive maintenance, obviously, when there's issues. And then all the digital supports, the app, Facebook, and different things, the website, etc., that underpins all of that and gets our communications out there as well. So I suppose just to go through that, particularly for people who are maybe thinking about EVs and aren't seasoned. Do you want to move on, Simon? So we introduced pay. The network was free to use, I suppose, since the first charger went in around 2010, up to November in 2019, where we undertook in early 2019 to replace a lot of the fast chargers. And once we were happy that we got the network up to a reasonable amount of reliability, we introduced pricing for that network in November 2019. And then we undertook, and I'll go into that in more detail, to replace a lot of the AC network from the original pilot, where we would have had multiple vendors of chargers. A lot of the charge points were no longer supported by the manufacturer, and we couldn't get parts for, etc. To trying to go towards, I suppose, less more modern equipment that proves to be more reliable, as I suppose the market developed and more companies started to provide charging equipment, and then also have the support of manufacturers where we could get parts, etc. So we then introduced pricing on the AC network, the 22 kilowatt and below network, in August onto September in 2020. And you can see the pricing around that at the site. And we would have engaged a lot, I suppose, with both the Owners Association, through surveys with EV owners around in advance of that, and we did a lot of one-to-one interviews as well around the pricing and what it should be. And I think in general we've got a lot of positive feedback. We're not going to keep everybody happy, I think, when we introduce pricing on something, but we've got a lot of positive feedback in that, I suppose, is making the network that is there, improving availability for those that actually need it. So that's the main points around that. You can see the pay-as-you-go rates in the right-hand side there and that. So just around, I've already touched on it a little bit around customer service and engagement. We know we have a bit to go, and we I suppose we had a dip in where we wanted to be with the network a couple of years ago, but also how we engaged on the charging network and where we are. We're looking to improve that all the time, and welcome feedback around that. And we're trying to, I suppose, improve our outreach as well around the etiquette of use of the network and how we communicate around the usage for new drivers that are coming on stream. I know we've talked lots with Simon and the committee as well around how we could, I suppose, partner within that as well to do a bit more around that. And I suppose we're trying to engage with lots of different stakeholders in the area to try and understand how we improve things and take our learnings as well from the UK market as well, how we can improve. So I suppose I've gone through kind of, I suppose, where we are with the network at the moment, where it originated from. And I suppose a number of years ago, we looked at, how can we what do we need to do to bring the network on to the next level? And we're looking at I suppose, what's happening in other markets, What are customers looking for? The network that we delivered, I suppose that while it had geographic spread, it probably needed to move a new direction to meet how the market has developed over that period of time. And I suppose it's trying to address all of those points in the column on the left-hand side, which is range anxiety. The cars are getting to higher range, but how can we ensure that we ensure there's a network right across the country, not just in the urban areas and places where it's most commercially viable to do it. How can we meet the expectations of the latest cars that are coming to the market that are going to be able to charge at 150 kilowatts and in time even higher than that? How can we improve our network availability levels? And I talked a bit about that already as the replacement program, and I'll go into that again in more detail. There's the queuing and overstay at chargers where people are staying on chargers too long, where there's queues at one-off chargers, and I know there are still issues that we're, I suppose, trying to work through and solve, and I'll go into the kind of plans that we have, and then ensuring there's confidence in the network. And I suppose this is it's still something that we're working on. Obviously, it's a work in progress. So how do we ensure that network is there on a national basis? How can we introduce 150 kilowatt charging in hubs so that we're reducing, if there is a single point of failure, that there's a sec rather than having a single point of failure, that there's a second charger, a third charger, a fourth charger, that they're reliable, that if somebody else is there charging in front of you, that you're not queuing behind them, that you'll have another option as well in that point of view. And how can we ensure that we have the support from the charge point manufacturers themselves to ensure that we have the parts to service those chargers. And then what I talked about, how can we improve our communications around the use of the network and the customer experience, and ensure that it's a network that I suppose that we're happy with and it is reliable in general. So let's move on, Simon, if you don't mind. So I suppose that we developed that plan that I talked about is how we could address all of those, and we came up with a plan that I suppose installed rapid chargers but fast chargers and high power chargers across Ireland in hubs, renews the existing network, and around that time there was the Climate Action Fund had put out a call for applications. So we made a big effort to put in an application for that. I think it was about 150 pages. I was involved in putting it together, with a view to building out these hubs and renewing the network right across the country. And we came in top on that, and I think we got about 10 million in funding, and then ESB matched it with another 10 million funding, and that's purely for capital expenditure, not the operation expenditure. For the network, and I suppose we draw that down as we deliver the project over time. So as part of that project, which was signed, I think, in October 2019, to date we've replaced about 186 chargers, which are done right across the country. That's in every county right across, with equipment that we're finding is a lot more reliable in general. I know we have some issues here and there. I think we're going to always have a little bit of that with equipment, but it's trying to get them resolved as quickly as we can. Then separately, our partner organisation within ESB, Smart Energy Services, had a partnership with Tesco's, and they've installed over 40 chargers at their sites, again of up to 22 kilowatt AC chargers. Just go beyond that. Again, Simon, if you don't mind. Strange talking out of the screen and not hearing any feedback. So just then, and the other part of this project as well is a upgrade to fast. So the plan is to do over 50 of the older AC chargers, to upgrade them. So using the same electrical connection to quickly roll out DC chargers in towns around the country that maybe there wasn't fast charging previously. So I suppose it allows us, rather than have to go into do civil works and electrical works and connections, which is all timely or takes quite a bit of time, it takes a little bit of time to do new sites from scratch. So this allows us to get in to towns right around the country. We've about 17 done so far, and you can see yourself in the slides. I'm not going to go through them. Right across the country, from Ballina to Westport, Clifton, Kenmare. So it's trying to get that spread to get more DC chargers out there. So there's 50 of those planned in total. I think the next phase is planned like to Burr, which is Burr and Offaly, Killarney. I think there's a couple planned for West Cork, Carlow, a couple of places in Wexford as well, Monaghan, and then we'll be continuing to phase after phase. So we'd expect to get another, hopefully maybe 20 of those installed by the end of the year, another 20 of them as well. Just to mention about the project itself, that the project itself is to run till about 2023 for completion. Simon, if you want to move on. So then the other part of the project that we're working on is to develop these larger sites. So there's three types of those. So one is some of the ones you've seen already that have been implemented, which is where we put a 50 kilowatt unit and a 150 kilowatt that can load balance. At these sites. So it's a 50 kilowatt and a 150 site. That's one type of charging site. Then the other types are 4 vehicles that can charge it at 150 kilowatts. So basically 600 kilowatt capacity at the site. And then the other larger sites is the 8 vehicle charging hub, which is a 1.2 megawatt location to the site. So you'll see 4 have been developed so far: Portlaoise, Kilcullen, Galway, Parkree and Kells. Under construction at the moment is there's one in Athlone, Ballinalack, Carrigan Shannon, which you can see on the right hand side. And I think we're starting fairly shortly on Ormore. Latty's due to go in as well, Sligo, Louth, Cork City as well. So they're the immediate pipeline of sites that are either under construction or that we will be starting construction in the next month or so. The challenge around finding these sites, and I suppose we're not where we wanted to be in the rollout of these chargers, is trying to find suitable sites with that I suppose we're reliant on site hosts to give us the locations, to provide us with the space to put them. So we've made all of the sites accessible from a wheelchair perspective in the new sites for the new hub sites. So I suppose there's quite a few spaces required to go with this, plus the electrical equipment to go with that. So the larger kind of 4 and 8 vehicle hubs require substations and electrical compounds, and you will have seen similar from other providers. So you do need a considerable amount of space, and that's definitely a challenge for us when talking to site hosts around this. Simon, if you want to move on. So the first of the 8 vehicle hub. I don't know why I have 4x8 vehicle, but anyway, what it's supposed to be is an 8 vehicle hub, and that's under construction at the moment in Junction 14. And you can see the construction; it's at an early stage. We'll expect that to go live in kind of end of May, early June, all going well, and depending on COVID and all the other different things. So we're looking forward to getting that delivered, and it'll be the first of those sites. So that's a kind of an overview of the direction where we're heading at the moment. So I think that's the last slide. Yeah,
it is.
And I'll be around at the end for questions anyway, so I can take those.
We'll take a couple of questions now, and if you can hang around to the end, that'd be great, and then we can. I think there's a few more rolling in, but we'll take a couple now.
It's distracting there. I could see the questions coming in the middle of the presentation. I was like, putting me off.
I had a couple. I have a couple that were submitted during the week, so I'll go to those, and then we'll take a couple that have come in as we go along, and then we'll move on. So I think you might have answered some of this already. There's a question about hubs, which you've obviously addressed in the presentation there, and I think that's great news and very positive for everyone to see. I guess an additional part of that question was regards specifically to like tourist areas like the Wild Atlantic Way, which traditionally haven't been well served by the network. Is there, other than what you've shown us there, are there specific plans to address the West Coast so that, you know, from a tourist perspective, it makes it easy?
I suppose there's not a specific Wild Atlantic Way plan, but I suppose we are mindful in some of the upgrades that we've done that they are in those areas. So I don't think I mentioned there, Dingle as well is on our next phase of plans of upgrades. So if you look recently towards the end of last year was, well, early last year was Sligo. We did Ballina, Westport, Clifton. We'll look to do Lahinch. So we're trying to, and sorry, that's a upgrade from the AC to DC at least. For some of the bigger towns along the Wild Atlantic Way, they will receive at least some of the smaller hubs, the 150 or the 50 kilowatt by 150 in time, I expect. But we have no plans, I suppose, to roll out additional kind of AC 22 kilowatt chargers. Really, any part of Ireland, really. I don't know if that answers your question.
Right. Yeah, I think that's good news. I was going to ask specifically about Dingle, and I know it's something we've talked about before, especially with the Dingle project in mind. So that's
it's funny. I had a call with a guy from Kerry Council yesterday who was he was saying it already. He's saying it's bombarded during the summer, Dingle, and then during the winter, then it's a lot less, I suppose, because the car park fills up there. So it's so I think at least having a charger that will have a quicker turnover of people would be at least a benefit anyway.
Yeah. There's a question also around obviously icing, and you know that's something we're looking to work with you and feedback information based on our survey. But from your perspective, you know, what are the actions that you guys are taking specifically around trying to deal with icing and locking in general?
I suppose from our perspective, it's engagement with the councils to try and enforce stuff around this. We've had a lot of engagement in the past as well around these, and some of them it hasn't been possible to get them marked. And then you'll see in some of the newer sites that we're doing, not just the hub sites, but the upgrades to 50 kilowatt as well. We've marked those out or put fresh marking on them as well. Part of, I suppose, when we met you last time as well, Simon, was saying, look, and the survey you mentioned there as well is, look, let us know as well what are the ones that are bad again, or that are causing issues, and then we can really focus on those and which particular local authorities to speak to around those as well, and see if we can try and get them addressed again. So it's trying to bring it front of mind again to identify what they are, I suppose, or what the issues are, and then we'll put a program together to do another kind of communication, and hopefully with yourselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always going to be an annoying problem. It's likely to be, I guess. And education is a big part of it, and I think, there may be people that will, you know, leave their car parked somewhere where it's already charged, or even use it as a parking space and things like that, and you know those things.
And that starts bringing up the tourney. We've had lots of discussions around the overstay fee for AC chargers as well, and just there's diverging views on that one as well. So it's not simple, and I suppose it'd be good from your survey to I suppose understand, is it not, if it's not marked in the first place, or is it marked and then it's just been abused anyway, regardless, which we see lots of as well. So.
Yeah. Okay. I had another question, and I know I gave you sight of this one earlier because I wasn't really sure. This came in from the Louth Environmental Group, and we're asking some questions around. I guess it was the original investment towards the network of €55 million. Is that you can talk to, or is that a very strange, out of context question? Do you want me to read it out for you again?
No, I can tell you what government funding went into the network. So the original, as I talked about, the pilot rollout of the network, so that was a pilot project that was done to look at the impact of electric vehicles on the grid. There was 25 million from the regulator to that at the time. and that meant that we put out chargers right across the country, to every part of the country, whether it was commercially viable or not, to put that geographic spread there, the chicken and egg scenario that I talked about. So that network's still there, still operated, despite, you know, Dingle mightn't add up commercially most of the year, or all of those other places. So that was the initial investment to do that, right, and operate the network. And then beyond that, the 10 million that I've talked about there from CAF. So I think we've drawn down about 1 million of that, right? So there's the regulated money at start 25, and then we've drawn down about 1 million or maybe 1.5 million, something like that, from the Climate Action Fund so far. So they're the figures. They're very much open. They're online.
Absolutely. And I guess one of the things that is maybe not obvious that for people that are coming to this quite recently is that obviously a lot of money was put in 10 years ago, but a lot of that infrastructure has had to be replaced more recently because, as you said, it's become defunct. Some of the manufacturers have gone and so on. So it's a continuing investment situation.
Yeah, and there's considerable amount to operate the network. I'm in eCars long enough to remember when, you know, 40 or 50 cars was a big year. We were delighted when we broke the 50 mark for EV sales in a year, right? So it's nice to see that there's thousands of cars coming on the road now at this stage. But it's I think I joined eCars in 2011. So it's come a long way since that point. I remember all the ups and downs around it. So
yeah. One more question then, and there's always a lot of questions around the state of the network in Northern Ireland, and I know some complications around that from the conversations that we've had. But do you want to broadly talk about what the situation is with Northern Ireland and why it's where it is at the moment, and possibly how it might improve in the future?
Yeah, and we do got a lot of engagement with the Northern Irish EV owners around this, right? It's not that we're probably where we were a number of years ago here with the network in Northern Ireland. It's not where we want it to be, right? So we ran into, I suppose there's a number of issues with it. The network was rolled out similar time frame that it was rolled out here. I suppose none of the charge points that are there now are actually supported by the manufacturers anymore, so we can't get parts. So what we actually need to do is an asset replacement program, replace a lot of the chargers that are there. And we estimate that probably somewhere in the region of kind of 1.5 to 2 million bracket. We plan to replace about 30, and we planned to do that a year or two ago. And when we went to do it, we realized that actually legally to replace the chargers, and we've done a few at this stage anyway, was that there was no permitted development rights. Was one issue. So that basically means, so if you want to replace a charger, you would have to go for planning permission to do it, right, based on the legislation that was in place at the time. We got that changed, which was great, and was great for help from the Department for Infrastructure to get that. And that came into force in December. We went to mini tender for chargers in November, and we will be plan to replace 30 in a number of rapid chargers. But to be honest with you, I suppose there's no commercial case. There's 4,000 cars. It's very difficult to I suppose we're a commercial business, to put 2 million euros into the network without some kind of funding. We're in Birmingham, we're in Coventry, we're in Transport for London. In all of those, there's been OLEV funding to support that. And I suppose we're looking to see if we can try and get some kind of help to replace the chargers there and get the reliability up to a level that we would all be happy with. And then if we can get that up, to introduce pricing in that as well in time. But we're not happy with it. We understand that, and we're engaging with a lot of stakeholders on that. We gave a statement to the EV owners in Northern Ireland there recently in relation to that as well, I think, and they have that published on their blog.
Yeah, they mentioned, because Guillaume and I engaged with a couple of the guys from the groups up north, and they mentioned that they met with you quite recently. So
yeah, I keep in touch with Mark Mark McCall in relation to that fairly frequently.
Yeah.
And can I just mention beyond that, I suppose from a Northern Ireland perspective, I suppose be keen that, you know, we're saying, look, the network needs to be developed there, but But beyond that, I suppose there needs to be a kind of a plan as to what is the target for 2030 there. How can we look at, and I'm not saying this from an ESB perspective, I'm saying this to whoever. There is funding from the UK government to provide charging infrastructure. Some of that needs to be ring fenced for Northern Ireland and given to, put out to the market for whoever to install those. I know there's Interreg funding coming in the next year or two as well to install chargers. So I think there needs to be more of a long-term plan as to if the 2030 target is coming into play, how can that be facilitated? How is there a roadmap for infrastructure and EV numbers and etc. to build up to be ready for that? So that's just a wider point beyond the existing network. I think there needs to be a bit of thinking on that.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's positive now that the UK is driving towards 2030 in the same way we are. So at least there's alignment there now. So hopefully that will happen. Okay, I'm just going to pass over to Kevin, who's got a couple of quick questions, and then we'll move on and take some more at the end if there's more for you. Then, Kevin, are you there?
Yep. Kevin Miriam O'Callaghan Dowling here. So, hey Conor. So I'm going to just take questions that are coming in on the forum and in the chat as we can best. I'll leave most of it to later on, but I've got two questions for you now. One really softball question. Someone's asking.
That means there's a hard ball. Okay.
It's a less softball after. Someone's asking, where is the Twitter account, and will you return to Twitter?
I don't think we ever had a Twitter account. I don't think. There's an ESB group Twitter account, maybe.
Yeah, I think the question is there's actually a few folks who asked this over the last day or so at the forum, and I think it's a question of people easily contacting ESB eCars on Twitter to go like, here's a queue, here's a broken thing. Derek is just saying there on the channel here that at ESB eCars is there since 2010. I think it's locked though. It has like 22 followers. It's not actually being used. So
I'm going to have to take that one away and come back to you. I don't actually know. I know there's a function within the app to report issues if you want directly. I know that's there, but from a Twitter perspective, I don't know, and I can ask the marketing team. I'm sorry. Softball, yeah, but I can't answer.
It's the softest above. The next one, it's not really a hard ball, but it's I'll probably ask this at the wider group later on. We're doing the big Q&A, but there's a bunch of questions, and the theme is kind of the future. So the government's 2030 plan is basically 1 million EVs on the road. How do you guys react to that? How does the grid react to that? Like, what's the kind of general plan, and how do you kind of get to that North Star of 1 million cars on the road?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose what we're looking at now is that initial steps to meet that, and I suppose there has, between ourselves and other providers, there has been a good move in the last year or two. We're not where we want to be. I suppose there's a lot to be played out in this as well, as to trying to understand the battery ranges, the distance the cars are going to travel. Obviously, I noticed SEI did a thing during the week. They reckon about 33%, I think, if I can remember correctly, of people can't charge at home. So how do we meet that? Most of our estimates are roughly around the 85 to 90% of charging will be done at home or in the workplace. So then it's trying to meet that requirement in other places. But I think it's we'll do our bit as much as we possibly can. But trying to facilitate that rest, I think it's just going to, as EV numbers grow, that's just going to naturally happen because the commercial case will be there. So if I'm a service station owner, I'll put a charger in my area. The local authorities will step up more and more the more that there is demand from people within their areas. So I think there is a lot to go on that. I know ESB networks are doing an awful lot, and Simon probably has more knowledge on the ESB network side of it than I would. And they're doing a lot of stuff at the moment, a lot of consultation around how they can meet that requirement in the future. But it's not simple. And there's a lot of stuff happening in the UK as well around smart charging and understanding smart charging and how that will happen overnight and have less impact on the grid. So there's lots of stuff up in the air, but I think in general you can see, like you can see it in the UK as well. There's so much happened because the issue as well is, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit here, but the issue as well is to make sure that everybody is facilitated, and that's the tricky bit, because as the market develops, lots of people will jump in, but they'll all jump into specific areas where it's commercially viable to do so, which is, the cities and the urban areas. So how do you make sure there's a spread? And I suppose I think part of the plan that we're developing now, part of the reason I think when we put that to Climate Action Fund for funding was the fact that we're trying to do this nationally. We're not just going to focus where it's commercially viable to do it in the first place. I'm not fully answering your question there, I think, but it's the best I can give at the moment.
I think, just like you said, I mean, just from what I understand of the engagements I've had with ESP networks, I mean, for people that don't know about the Dingle project, I mean, I don't want to say too much about it here because we're going a bit over already on this particular section. But I mean, the idea of the Dingle project is that it's kind of a microcosm of what the future network could look like, and all of the inputs and outputs from that. So part of it is bringing a good number of EVs into that and looking at how you charge them, whether we're using vehicle to grid, smart metering, and local generation activities as well. So that's the whole learning. The idea of that project is that it's a learning process that can then, you know, be looked at and then scaled out. Remains to be seen how that goes. Obviously, ESP Networks also just published the electrification of heat and transport strategy document, which is, you know, worth a look at, because a lot of people say, well, the grid isn't going to cope, but, you know, there's a lot of clever people out there thinking about how they're going to make this work, and there is a strategy. So there's a lot going on to make sure that the grid should be able to cope with 1 million electric vehicles, if indeed we get to that number, by 2030. And that's what, you know, we're working towards. There's a lot of other factors play into that, of course, from, you know, manufacturers and pricing and consumer, you know, readiness. But I mean, the work, part of the work, which is making the grid ready for that, is being well thought about. So I feel positive about that.